Hello, in this lecture we're going to continue on with Economics and Economic Reasoning, Chapter 1. Remember that the objectives are to define economics, which we have, discuss ways in which economics use economic reasoning, explain real-world events in terms of economic forces, social forces, and political forces. Alright, so we're going to jump back into the theory of the invisible hand. So, according to the invisible hand theory, a market economy through the price mechanism will allocate resources efficiently. So the invisible hand is the foundation, or a term to describe the foundation of economics theory from Adam Smith, and this is going to be the idea that markets are going to self-regulate, have a market mechanism, and when we think of a market mechanism, what we're thinking of are the questions of who's going to determine what to produce, who's going to determine how to produce it, who's going to determine how to distribute what is produced. And when we think of those questions, who's going to do that? If we're thinking about the invisible hand doing that, we're saying nobody particularly, we're not going to have an individual, we're not going to have a committee particularly do that. What's going to happen is we have a mechanism, the market, that does that, the market being the invisible hand. So who makes those decisions in terms of the market? The market makes those decisions. The invisible hand makes those decisions. Now, the interesting thing about that is that it's pretty much widely accepted, almost universally accepted, that where the invisible hand, where markets work, the environments in which markets are effective, and they're not effective in all areas, and we'll talk about that later when we think about problems like pollution or certain types of businesses and types of production, markets may not work perfectly, and that's a challenge we have. But where they do work, where they are effective, then the market is thought to be most efficient, meaning the market actually makes better decisions in terms of efficiency about who should make what, how should it be made, and in many terms, how should it be distributed. So that's going to be the idea. So then if we think about the market in the broad sense, in a basic sense, what we're saying is prices fall when quantity supply is greater than the quantity demanded. So when we think about the prices, say, of individual types of things within the market, we're going to assume that prices will fall when supply is greater than what is demanded. So when there's more supply out there than what is demanded, what's going to happen? Well, the invisible hand of the market will automatically reduce the price, and that will even out the demand. And note the argument here being that the market is better at doing that than someone trying to determine for the entire market how to do that. So the market mechanism does that more efficiently. Prices rise when the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. So if more people want the stuff than is supplied, then the market, just by market mechanisms, will raise the prices in order to equal out the demand and supply. And again, the market is more efficient in doing that than anything else. So efficiency means achieving a goal as cheaply as possible. So when we think about efficiency, note that we often are going to think in dollars again, but it's not, we don't have to just think in dollars when we're thinking about efficiency. We want to make things as cheaply as possible. Remember, we talked about things like opportunity cost and whatnot. We want overall the thing to be as cheap as possible. The same kind of concept for efficiency can be thought of it. We hear efficiency in things like engineering, where if we're talking about an engine being most efficient, then the engine is producing the most output, the most amount of energy in terms of the input, such as the fuel. So the question of efficiency is how we don't want to waste the energy of the fuel. How can we be the most efficient? How can we get the most output for the most input? And that's the same similar type of policy here. We want to be the most efficient, usually making more stuff rather than less stuff, but also making the stuff that is most demanded, the stuff that is most wanted, and distributing that stuff in the most efficient and effective way. So economic institutions. To apply economic theory to reality, you've got to have a sense of economic institutions. So, these are going to be institutions that are going to deal with, economic policies and conditions. So economic institutions are laws, common practices, and organizations in a society that affect the economy. Economic institutions differ significantly among nations. So clearly, when we're thinking about laws and we're thinking about policy, of course, when we talk about macroeconomics in particular, that goes along with economic policy very closely. Many of the economic policies, many of the things that we argue about and talk about in terms of public policy has to do with economics, and different institutions, of course, in different countries are going to have different ways in which to implement economic policies and think about economic theories. They sometimes seem to operate differently than economic theory predicts. And of course, this is a constant problem with economics. And when we think about economics, the economist is often not the policymaker or the person in charge of making decisions. And even among economists, there's going to be arguments in terms of what should we do in terms of a purely economic standpoint. There's generally arguments. But even if the economic world, all the economists got together and came up with the same idea of what should happen under a particular condition, it's clear that the policies that go into place don't always align with that. It's difficult to have the policies line up with what the economic theories should be. So economic policy options. Economic policy are actions or inaction taken by the government to influence economic actions. So note that the important thing, or one of the important things here is, of course, the government is involved with economic policy. Policy often deals with the economy. And note that there's this argument about action or inaction. That's often an argument in and of itself, meaning many times you'll hear in a political argument that in order to improve the economy, the government needs to get out of it in many ways. Meaning let the invisible hand do what the invisible hand does, because in some cases the invisible hand, as we discussed, is more efficient than the government going in, or some committee or some group of people trying to outguess the market. So that could be one of the problems, or that could be one argument. And of course, there are arguments in terms of when should the government go into a market. What are the types of occasions where the government can improve a certain situation, and when can they not? When might them going into it actually worsen a type of situation? So objective policy analysis keeps value judgment separate from the analysis. So if we're going to think objectively about data, we're going to think about data, and basically we're just going to try to look at it as basically just the facts. Tell me the facts about the data. If we think about subjective policy analysis, reflects the analyst's view of how things should be. So subjective means we have the goal. We got a goal in mind, and we're trying to basically think about how things should be in order to achieve a particular goal. Economic policy options. To distinguish between objective and subjective analysis, economics is divided into 3 categories. So we're going to try to subcategorize this stuff so that we're clear about what we are doing. So if we think about positive economics, it's the study of what is. So that's kind of like just the facts. This is what is. If we think about normative economics, is the study of what should be. So that means we're speculating into the future and trying to think about what should be, what could be, and how can we go through that. The art of economics is using the knowledge of positive economics, just the facts, what is or what is now, to achieve the goals determined in normative economics, meaning what should be, what is the future goal, how can we get from here to there.